thanks for joining me today for episode 32 of Podcasting Your Brand, formerly known as Business in the Bedroom. I'm your host, Producer Jaime, providing learning lessons for you to podcast your brand. And today I'm going to share a bunch of preliminary tips from my extensive experience building brands through the power of podcasting. This episode is brought to you by my own brand, Flintstone Media. Listen in and let's do this. So, hey, what's new? Anything new with you? What's going on? Oh my gosh, there is so much new with me. So much going on. But let's start with what's going on with this show. Oh my goodness. So, all right. I felt that the startup chapter of my journey on this show, Business in the Bedroom, had come to a good conclusion. I felt like I had accomplished what I really wanted to accomplish with those episodes. We went from defining your why on episode 1 all the way to using conferences to your advantage and my keynote address for National Entrepreneurs Day on episodes 30 and 31. Like, we accomplished a lot in just 31 episodes. But that journey didn't feel like it was yet in its full and complete entirety, but it did somehow feel complete. Okay, this doesn't make any sense. I'll explain. I felt like I had completed a chapter, and that completed chapter led to a new chapter of me really honing in my message on this show. I decided after a lot of thinking through and soul searching and brainstorming, I decided that I wanted to start leaning into what people are really wanting to hear from me anyway, and what I really love talking about anyway. And now in this chapter of my life, because those first 31 episodes were really about how I built the business, how I got it off the ground, how I went from having a business that was being bootstrapped in my bedroom to being like a full gig with a team, right? So that was that. But I wanted to talk about what's going on now in this chapter of my life, which is building your brand through the power of podcasting. And I talk about podcasting a lot. I speak at conferences. I guest on other people's shows talking about podcasting. I hold rooms on Clubhouse on podcasting or join in other people's rooms. I'm the organizer of the Palm Beach Podcasters Meetup group. I wrote the podcasting curriculum that was adopted by the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. Like, I'm a little obsessed. Just a little obsessed. And my other podcast is a show, also about podcasting, and I co-host it. It's the Podfest podcast, which is put on by Podfest Multimedia Expo. Like, I love talking about podcasting. And actually, on the Podfest tip, it's actually coming up at the end of this month. So grab your tickets and come meet me at Podfest in Orlando at the end of May. You can get your tickets at podfestexpo.com. And if you use our promo code NETWORK, you get 25% off your ticket. So there you go. A little gift for you. So I lead, or I am at least heavily involved with all these different pocket podcast communities because I just love talking about podcasting and helping people who are trying to figure out podcasting as my way of giving back to an industry that's honestly given me so much. And I've also been in podcasting and running my own podcast production house, Flintstone Media, since 2014. Yeah, that little thing. And in that capacity, I've been producing for independent clients, managing production for Horse Trader Network and other podcast networks, hosting my own shows, like I just mentioned, and founding and building the Florida Podcast Network. That's been my project since 2017. Actually, by the way, breaking news for Florida Podcast Network, Florida Beer Podcast with host Dave Butler of the Florida Beer blog just won a gold crushie from the Craft Beer Marketing Awards, and it just crossed its 100th episode milestone. Like, massive congratulations to Dave. You crushed it. Woo woo. So yes, it just was such a natural thing for this show to be in a new chapter. So here we are. Podcasting Your Brand is officially born. And luckily enough, I already owned the URL. It was like an old SEO play years ago. I got the URL and I pointed it to my website. So luckily I have the URL. So it all worked out. Look at that. And not all the episodes will be solo anymore. Like there'll be still a lot of that, like this. This one today is solo. But I'm also going to be bringing onto the show people who've been my mentors, my peers, my community members, and my clients to lend their voices, their questions, and their perspectives on podcasting their brands. And I may even bring back a version of a segment from my very first podcast ever, a podcast called Curve the Cube, and a segment that I called The Learning Curve. So we'll see what happens. But there's one more little change. One more little thing to tell you is that this show will now be partnered with Florida Podcast Network. So that means that now, in addition to it being its own independent show, it will now also be featured on the FPN website and the FPN All Shows feed, which is a catch-all feed of all the episodes across the network for superfans who don't want to risk missing anything. And there's a surprising lot of you out there. So there you go. This show will be served up on the FPN platter for you moving forward now as well. So yay. Okay. Are you ready for this rebrand? I'm so ready. So without further ado, let's dive into our first tip on podcasting your brand. So as I mentioned, I guest on shows and other such places talking about podcasting, and I've had the pleasure of being a guest on quite a few shows over these last number of months. And what I'm going to do today with you is to run through some of the tips and things that I've shared on those shows. I reached out to the hosts. They were all so super gracious to agree to let me use those clips, even though I was like, really, really vague as to how I was going to use them. I'm like, yeah, it's just for a future project. Just trust me. Well, here we go. Here's the project. So thanks, guys. So yeah, this will be a quick sizzle reel of those clips with me introducing each one. Then on the next few episodes that follow, I'll start with fleshing out each of these tips for you. But for now, just sit back and enjoy the fire hose of good info picked straight from my brain. First up, I have a clip from Creating Daily, a daily live show on content creation put on by the amazing Billy Thorpe. And he called this episode Boost Your Podcast Launch with Producer Jaime. And we recorded it back on April 1st. I talk a little bit about the correct order of a podcast launch and my mirror exercise. Enjoy. Essentially, if you're launching a podcast, think of it like there's a car train, right? And there's certain things that have to be done in a proper order in order to maximize effect and minimize your budget. And so what I recommend is, first of all, you need to know what your show is going to be about. So it's not so simple, right? Okay, you might say I want to do a show about adopting dogs. Fine, that's great. But there's so much more you need to think about and think through. So one of the first steps that I bring my clients through, and I actually will share this as a really good piece of advice that I want everyone to consider, because we often think about, what's your why? Why are you doing the show? That has to be the first thing you think about, but it's a little more complicated than that. I think about it in two sides, and you need to have both of those sides answered in order to know what kind of show you're going to put together and how to best deliver on those. And those two sides are the why for your audience, and then there's the why for yourself. And those can be very, very different. And they probably are very, very different. And so I walk through what I call my mirror exercise, and I ask them to hold up a mirror and then face it out to the audience. Usually this is the easiest part, because when they face it out to the audience, I'm asking them, what do you want the show to do for them? And they go, like, they know. I want it to inspire them to do this. I want it to educate them on this. I want to make them laugh. I want to right? So then we get to the second part of the mirror exercise. That's when it can sometimes get a little uncomfortable. So then I have them pretend that they're facing the mirror to themselves. And when I ask them, what do you want the show to do for you? Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes podcasters are podcasters because they want to give, spread a message, make a movement, deliver an impact. They're not doing it to put a spotlight on them. But I tell them, I remind them, it is okay to put a spotlight on you. And if that's what you want, you need to express that. Let's have that as part of the conversation. I need to know that. So the spotlight on them, the why for yourself, if you're thinking about this for your own show.
Love this.
And yeah, it can be anything from monetizing. I want to make some money, or at least defray the costs of production if I'm outsourcing, right? I want to become a public speaker. I want to sell more books. I want to become known in this industry or break into this industry and network in this industry. So whatever those reasons are, you need to know what those are, because both of those sides of the coin are going to formulate how to structure your show. Because if you have that as the intention, it can't just be about just the interview. It has to be, okay, the interview, and what is the point of that interview? Is this person actually going to come on and give the value that I'm promising my audience that they're going to give? And if by doing this interview, is it going to add to my footprint in this podcast and help elevate me to my own goals? So step one, knowing your why, but recognize that there's two sides to it. Now remember, this episode is a total tease. I will be taking a deeper dive into my mirror exercise and the various reasons why people podcast in the next episode. So just sit tight. I promise it's coming. All right. Up next on this sizzle reel train are thoughts I shared on naming a podcast. I was a guest on my friend Kat Corchado's show, Sisters in Service. She called the episode Live, Love, Laugh, and Zombies. You never know what you're going to get when you invite me on. And she did. And we recorded it back on December 16th. And in this clip, I also share a little on my own journey into discovering my passion for podcasting and giving this show its original name. One of my favorite things is naming a podcast. When I have a lot of clients and stuff, and I have Florida Podcast Network, so I create some shows from scratch. And that's always my favorite part, is naming of a show. So when I decided to start my own solo show, it's the first of my own, completely my own show, no co-hosts in a very, very, very long time. My very, very first show was called Curve the Cube. And it was me interviewing other people who are doing what they love for a living and wanting to find out how they got there, what was their journey like and how they made it. And I learned a lot. And over the course of that show, realized that podcasting was what I wanted to do for a living. And I fell in love with it. And it became my own story. I didn't expect it to, but it did. So then fast forward so many years, and I've now fully independent podcasting full time. I have a team, all these things. I really felt the pull to get back on the microphone and now share everything that I learned and help other people. At the end of the day, that's my entire life's mission, is to help other people pursue their dreams for a living. And so I figured, let me get this show out there. And I called it Business in the Bedroom because that's how I started my business. It was in the bedroom. So even though it might get you to think of something else, bait and switch, y'all.
Okay, I'm sorry, that's where my head went.
Bait and switch. But what's funny is when somebody is a side hustler and is trying, has their 9 to 5 and they're trying to build something, they're often doing it from their bedroom, Right. And so that's who it's speaking to. And when they see it, they immediately know. I've had so many people say, oh my gosh, that's me. Yes, that's me. So it's a practical guide for the newbie entrepreneur, and it's called Business in the Bedroom. And on one of my very next episodes, I'll take a deeper dive into naming a podcast. There's seriously so much to talk about, and it's my favorite thing. As I said, it's my favorite thing. So I promise to give up the goods in a future episode. If you're not subscribed yet, be sure you do. You don't want to miss it. All right, next up, I reveal the 2 technical pieces you need to submit your show to all the podcast players and the 5 main technical steps to launching a podcast. It's a clip from my other show, the Podfest podcast, which I co-host with my buddy Glenn the Geek from the Horse Radio Network. So in order to launch a show, there are 2 things you absolutely have to have. Number 1, you need an audio track. And the second thing you need is a piece of show art. Now, we dove into show art pretty well in episode 6. So go back.
You don't want to get me started again.
No, go back and listen to him all wound up on episode 6 about show art. But the show art is the thing that people see when they are searching podcast players for your kind of content and your show pops up. So those are the 2 things that the podcast platforms need you to have: an audio track and a piece of show art. So then you're going to sign up for a hosting account. Now, obviously, Buzzsprout is our favorite. Like we were saying, amazing services, great functionality, and incredible humans behind the wheel. So we love us some Buzzsprout. So sign up for Buzzsprout or your other hosting account of your preference, and then publish that first track. A little trailer. It can be a full episode that you want to submit your show now to the platform. So once you have something published on a track, now what is created by your hosting account is what's called your RSS feed. So your RSS feed is essentially a whole bunch of computer code, a website code that if you were to type it, it looks like a URL. And if you were to put your URL into a browser, you would see what your RSS feed's content is. And it just looks like a whole bunch of computer code. But essentially, it's all the information about your show and all the episodes. It's all in there. So it's what the different players and platforms read in order to play your show. So you need to submit your show to those platforms. Once you create your hosting account, you establish an episode, it gives you that URL. So that URL is your RSS feed's basically web address, right? Now, some platforms, you can submit your show with a very simple push of the button. It depends a little bit about which hosting company you sign up with. Some of them have relationships. It just is a push of a button. Buzzsprout has great relationships with a lot of platforms. It's really easy. Libsyn as well. Some of them you need to submit manually no matter what. TuneIn, for example, you need to submit manually. Some of them you need to actually create an account and then submit manually. And I cannot stress this enough that you need to do this. So Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, create your own account and then submit your show using that RSS feed. And then don't neglect platforms that you haven't heard before, like Deezer and Ghana. Those are platforms that are huge in other countries. So you never know where your show is going to blow up and get really popular. So make sure you're on platforms that aren't just really big here in the States, that are big internationally as well. And the last thing, a little bonus. So those are the 5 main steps. Okay. Create an audio track, create show art, sign up for a hosting account, publish your first track, and then submit yourself to the platforms. But then as an additional thing, also count out 60 days on your calendar and put a note on that date to submit your show to iHeart. iHeartRadio has a 60-day waiting period before you can submit your show. And so you're probably going to forget if you don't put it on your calendar, but you definitely want your show on iHeart. So that's the last thing I wanted to add in my little rundown of the very simple technical steps of getting your podcast off the ground and launched. And on one of my very next episodes, I'll take a deeper dive into the technical launch process. You see how this is going here. You get the pattern now. Okay, for this next part, I'm actually going to share 2 clips that lend themselves to telling the story of why I started podcasting and how I fell in love with it. And I wanted to share that with you because my story is a learning lesson on the potential that can be reached through the power of podcasting. I absolutely love this space because that power honestly is limitless. First is a clip from Late Bloomer Living, a podcast by my friend Yvonne Marchese. I was in corporate life for many years as a data analyst. When I graduated college, I graduated with 2 bachelor's degrees in business, one in information systems management, one in finance. So I kind of put those together and I decided to go into data analytics. I love coding. I'm a total nerd. I love coding. So if you say, I want a report that does this, me having the chance to go in and find the databases and find the tables and the fields and how they work, and putting the like, I loved it. It was my favorite thing ever, right? But then after 15 years of it and kind of reaching the pinnacle of what I could do, I was bored. But it's funny because in that life, you know, you're isolated, you're in your cubicle, you're scrunched down, you're typing all day and you're doing your thing. So at the time, I listened to this radio show every day because they got me through what was now a pretty boring time and they're hilarious. So I listened to them on the way into work and then they would repackage their morning show as a podcast. So I'd listen to it once, maybe twice during the course of the rest of the day. And then I discovered I was really passionate about this digital marketing thing. So I'm like, well, how can I really make this business work? So I decided to interview people who I knew who were doing what they love for a living. And I decided to do it as a podcast so that I wasn't the only one who had the answers. Everyone could share and benefit from this information. Mm-hmm. So I just started doing that, really not expecting much of it than just be this weekly conversation I had. And I completely fell in love with it. completely fell in love with it. I fell in love with the excitement people had for being able to be on the show. I fell in love with the excitement from listeners, knowing that they had a resource that was guiding them in their pursuit of their passions, to know that they weren't crazy for wanting to do this thing. So this is what I love. I love that not only can I do it because I love it, but then I can also be a vehicle for other people. And I realized that this is what I wanted to do. So Flintstone Media quickly became geared towards being a podcast production company. And now I'll follow that up for you with a clip from the Windhurst podcast with my friend, Nicole Walker. They called me, this radio show that I've been such a fan of. They called me and they said, when we get back on the air, we want 2 producers. We would love to consider you to be a producer. And I said, I've never produced anything before, right? And I'm like, Jimmy, shut up. Your dream job is being handed to you on a silver platter. Shut your mouth. But I said it, and they said, that's okay. You can be the content producer. You know our content. So I thought, well, I don't want to walk in day one not knowing anything. And so I'm like, let me start a podcast. Then I also thought, well, I'm really good, apparently, at digital marketing. So I started my company doing digital marketing, social media, website design, development, PR. And I'm like, how do you build a business doing something you love? How do you do what you love for a living? I don't know. How do you do that? So I'm like, well, let me ask some people on a podcast so everyone can get their answers. So I started podcasting in order to find out how to build a business that I wanted to do for a living, to figure out how people do that. And then it also was a way for me to spread the word. And on accident, fell in love with podcasting. And I was not officially offered the job with the radio station. And so now I had this business that I was growing. I was falling in love with podcasting. And I went to my first conference about 1.5 years later. And that was it. I was done. I was like, oh, you can make money of this? You can build a business? Oh, tell me more. That was it. Then I flipped my business from digital marketing and web design and stuff to podcasting over several years. It took a while. And last but not least, I share a clip from the time I got to revisit my friend Jason Hill's show at the Shrimp Tank for a second time. It was a live interview. Well, I didn't revisit for a second time. I got to visit it, and then this revisit was a second. You know what I mean? Anyways, it was a live interview on his Shrimp Bite series. And to be sure, I get you fully prepared for this journey of podcasting your brand. I discuss some of the common mistakes that lead to pod fade. Yes, pod fade when you stop podcasting. I take people from the very beginning because I believe I need to set them up properly. And that includes guiding them away from common mistakes that do cause people to pod fade. One of those common mistakes is you've never created content before and you're a very busy person and you say, well, I have to have an episode every week. You may end up getting tired of that and not having the support behind you to to keep it going, and you've pod fade. So those are the kinds of things. So I do tend to stick with people who are just starting out. However, because I've met, especially through Clubhouse, through Owl, through social networking, I've met other people who already have podcasts and they have a lot of questions for me. So I now have a podcast booster class to help them to just give out the solid, here's some rules that I say, these work. This is what's worked for me, and take this and run with it. So there's that. So I do prefer to help people from the get-go because I can set them up properly, but I do also help people course correct. And yes, I will take a deeper dive into avoiding pod fade on a future episode of Podcasting Your Brand. And as a quick mention, if you are podcasting your brand, whether a personal brand or a business brand, then you want to check out the app created by the host in that clip, my friend Jason. It's the Owl app, spelled with 2 W's and 2 L's. Monetize your expertise on Owl, going active when you want to and taking calls from people seeking your advice. In fact, you can catch me on there for a one-on-one on-demand coaching session. And as a side note, it's a great way to land some extra clients. So check out Owl. I'll have a link in the show notes. And just sign up with my referral code PL954123 and get yourself a $10 credit. All right. So as I've been promising, just to restate it, I'll take these first topics. I know they came at you quick, but I'll take the first topics touched on in this Sizzle Reel rebrand episode and flesh each of them out in a future episodes, the ones that are literally coming up next. So just sit tight. along with a ton of other great info from my experience over the years building brands through the power of podcasting. So if you're not subscribed, be sure you do. In the meantime, I have a whole host of free tips for you on my website. Just go to flintstonemedia.com/free tips. And thank you again to all the hosts who have given me permission to include their clips here today. Billy Thorpe of Creating Daily, Kat Corchado of Sisters in Service, Yvonne Marchese of Late Bloomer Living, Nicole Walker of Win Hers, and of course, Chris Kremitzos of Podfest. By the way, if you're headed to Podfest at the end of May, be sure to track me down, but be warned, I'm a hugger. Thanks for tuning in for Podcasting Your Brand, and the crowd goes wild. Woohoo! I'm so excited. Oh my gosh. I want this new chapter of the show to reveal to you the power of podcasting and how you can harness that power to help expand your brand. The entire goal of my company, the whole reason I built it, Flintstone Media, Flintstone, what does it do? The whole purpose of my company is to ignite other people's passions and bring them to fruition. So I've enjoyed doing that through the power of podcasting since 2014. And with an extensive background that also involves data analytics, website design and development, what else on the list? SEO work. Oh yeah, and I even attended a top 10 law school, can't forget that. I've pulled lots of pieces together from the course of my life and my career to craft success for various shows and brands. So come and learn what I have picked up and tested over the years. Avoid common mistakes and propel your podcasting and branding forward. And if you have questions or are interested in becoming a sponsoring brand of this show, don't be shy. Reach out to me anytime at Jaime, spelled Jaime, at flintstonemedia.com. That's Jaime, Jaime, at flintstonemedia.com. It's Producer Jaime signing off for now. Remember, the only thing more powerful than your voice is your spirit to use it. So turn that mic on.